Welcome back to Heart with me, Shakti Sundari. I'm here in the beautiful London home of one of my favourite, most amazing Tantra teachers in the world, Leora Lightwoman. Leora was one of my very first Tantra teachers, totally inspired me. She has 22 years of experience in this field, so I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Welcome, Leora, and thank you so much for welcoming us to your home.
Thank you, Shakti. Welcome. I'm just so happy to have you here in my home and honoured to be part of Heart to Heart.
Thank you. I don't know where to begin because there's so much to ask you, Leora. I guess the way I often start is to inquire as to how you got into this field. How did you get into teaching Tantra?
So actually I was working as a yoga teacher at the time, and I was working as a yoga teacher in a very precise Japanese approach to yoga and Buddhism and meditation. And I had got to a point where I was really wanting to let go, wanting to expand, wanting to embrace my relational and sexual life. And wasn't sure that the path I was following was particularly giving me much guidance or showing me how that part of my life was also part of a spiritual path, part of a spiritual practice.
So does this mean then that you were seeking spiritually from quite a young age then?
Yes, so I think I was always seeking meaning, and the meaning that came to me most obviously was originally through yoga, and originally at that time through Buddhist practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Japanese practice. What was the practice?
It was a Japanese form of yoga that involved meditation, yoga postures, and certain kinds of retreats.
Okay.
And it was very good for me at the time because it was very structured. And at the same time I was longing to really find a way to embrace my sensuality, because aside from that I was doing a lot of dancing. I was dancing at a club that was, it was a salsa club, but actually a lot of people who came to the club were from the African community, and they were incredibly sensual. And I used to love dancing there, and I used to love being sensual. But I wasn't really sure how to integrate this very rigid yoga practice and this incredibly free and warm approach to sensuality with intimate relationship, with sex.
So then, where did the curiosity, or how did Tantra suddenly come into your world?
So I went travelling, and I went to a conference in Australia on breathing, and there I met some teachers who were teaching Tantra. And I went to this workshop, and it was like the lights went on, and what really went on was my heart. So I'd been embracing my sensuality, I'd been really practicing a discipline spiritually, and yet what hadn't fully infused either of those was my heart. In fact, it was always there, longing to be there, but it didn't have the same place. And in this very small workshop, I really felt that I was able to meet my heart, meet the hearts of others in an incredible way. People I'd never met before, I suddenly felt this real love for, and it wasn't a clinging love, it wasn't a desire, it was a real warmth and knowing. And that's what the meaning was for me. That's what I wanted to pursue.
Oh, that's beautiful. Can you remember a particular moment in that workshop where, you had a realization, or was it just a gradual sense of aha?
It was definitely both. There was a gradual sense of something opening up, and then there was a particular moment of showing my heart to somebody and seeing their heart. And we did it symbolically, but it was so real. It was so real. And I think that symbolism has remained with me, how different it is to meet someone and actually show my heart and actually receive their heart.
So had you been a sexual being up until this point, or had your spiritual path taken you into celibacy?
I'd been sexual, but it was a bit haphazard. I tended to fall in love with unavailable men. They tended to all be emigrating at the point I fell in love with them. And I tended to, I would have a few flings with people who I thought were really wonderful, but there wasn't a long-term potential there. So I was longing for those two things to come together, that longing and that love that I felt for the men who weren't available, and the passion I'd felt in men who also really weren't available. And, you know, I discovered that this was really a reflection of my not being available truly in my own sexuality and heart together. So Tantra gave me a way to feel and know the two of those together and to be able to commit to a real relationship.
Ooh, that's a powerful statement. So then, you know, it's a bit of a truism, because so often I used to hear this and it really pissed me off that people would say to me, well, whatever's on the outside is a reflection of what's on the inside. And I'd be like, you know, but that's exactly what you've just said, really.
Yes.
Is that what this this path has shown you, that realization of that inner relationship between masculine and feminine?
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have known it at the time, but the patterns were too vivid to be ignored. That something of what I kept repeating unconsciously, you know, had to be something of what was coming up from my unconscious to be healed. Right. And, you know, as I was able then to be more attentive to what was happening inside me, then on the outside things changed also.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, a teacher of mine, I'd already been practicing Tantra for some time, said something that was revolutionary to me. He said that his teacher had said to him that actually connecting heart and sex is one of the hardest things we do as humans. And that blew my mind, because I'd been taught that Tantra is about connecting heart and sex. And yet in my own life that had been so hard to fully embody that in a sustained way, momentarily fine, but sustained way, because we actually become very vulnerable. You know, when we commit to someone and when we commit our sexual energy and when we open our hearts, you know, we become incredibly vulnerable. And Tantra is also about giving us the tools and the capacity to live with that degree of vulnerability and to sustain it and to give it meaning and beauty and to be a safe haven for each other as well.
So you talk about the vulnerability. I can imagine that approaching that, particularly for somebody who might not have any experience of doing that before, can be quite intimidating. What would you say to that person, whether it's a man or a woman, that sort of fear that might come up of suddenly feeling...
Thank you. I think that's such a precious question, because I think that comes up all the time. You know, that's what we're all up against, is how vulnerable can I allow myself to be? And how I work is really with honouring that actually, you know, we don't need to be more vulnerable than we're ready to be, otherwise we're not. You know, it's just about that little bit of testing the water. Can I trust myself? Can I trust this other? Can I open this little bit more? What's it like in this world? You know, how is it just to let go a little bit more? And what changes? And then gradually that can continue. That can continue. And sometimes we may need to close down, and that's not a bad thing. It's good that we're able to do that. But when we can notice that there's this pulsation of life that wants to sometimes pull back in and regroup and longs to open up, it gives the muscle of vulnerability that possibility to expand and contract more through choice, rather than being trapped in this forever, which is desperately lonely.
And so then, was it a case of, right, I need to explore this with all that I am, this is the path for me, or again, was it sort of a gradual sense of that path just opening for you? What were the next steps?
So I was very lucky that this workshop was actually a precursor to a much longer training. And I don't think I even thought about it. I think it was just entirely natural for me to continue from there. And you know, the next thing I remember was being at a workshop and alternating between laughing and crying and laughing and crying, as a whole load of pent-up emotions that had been held in me for a long time started to unwind, and I felt this real sense of freedom and let go. So that wasn't a genital orgasm, there was this quality of this orgasmic energy moving through my body, clearing something out, opening me. And before that, I had just really not understood some of the people I'd been around from that community who had been like just so free to laugh. It was a wonder to me. I wanted it, I longed for it, but I just didn't know where it was coming from. And then suddenly I was in it, this place where laughter was bubbling up and running through me, and it was incredible.
So then at what point in your journey did you, because I read that you trained with Margot Anand, who is of course world-renowned, great-grandmother of Western Tantra anyway. So what was when did you encounter her?
So my visa ran out after a year in Australia, I had to leave, and then I went via America, and in America I did a retreat with a community of people who were at that point writing a magazine called Tantra, the magazine, and a very, very diverse approach from various different traditions and teachers. So I had a chance to diversify my understanding of what Tantra could be. And then I came back to England in the middle of winter, and I think I picked up a magazine, that's right, I picked up a magazine, and in that magazine, Margot Anand was coming to England the next week. But I had no money because I just got back. I had no job, no money, nowhere to live. And I called up, I said, look, I really want to do this. And they said, well, actually, we need another woman on the workshop. You can come for a much reduced price. Here's someone who will drive you there. And there I was a week later.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's the only time she's been to the UK practically in, probably 10 years since. It took another 10 years to come here again.
Wow, so it was clearly meant to be. So now, beginning teaching, and you've been teaching for 22 years. Such a wealth of experience and wisdom you've had. Have you always been teaching in the UK?
Yeah, I've always been here.
So I'm wondering, because so many people see Tantra and they hear the word sexual energy or sex, and there's a lot of maybe false ideas that get pinned onto what this practice is. So I'd love to hear from you what your definition of Tantra is and what you bring to it in your own workshops and your one-to-ones and your retreats.
Thank you. Well, I am, as I think you know, in the process of really changing my brand, how I call my work, because what most of us, almost all of us, do in the West now is really what's called Neo-Tantra. It's a mixture of traditional tantric principles and pragmatic approaches to helping people.
That's a really good definition.
Yeah. And I love it. But I don't feel so comfortable anymore using the word Tantra, which I think is far bigger, wider and deeper than I would see myself as really a beacon of. I see myself as a beacon of transformation. And what I know that I can offer is change and openness, particularly in the relational field. So, what I particularly love is seeing individuals and seeing couples open up in ways they've never done before, easily, without stress, and with joy, with relief, with, in all sorts of ways. So I would perhaps discern a definition of Tantra, which I feel perhaps actually less qualified to give you an ultimate response to, and perhaps a far more embodied response to what is Neo-Tantra and what is it that I'm offering in that field, which I feel passionate about.
Why are you so passionate about it?
What I absolutely love is, I'm thinking often, a couple, they come to see me and they've done a lot of work, they've done couples counselling, they really love each other, and they have an intractable problem as they've experienced it so far. And they've got a lot of understanding, but this barrier to intimacy or sexual expression has hurt them both. And what I feel very passionate about is that in some really simple ways of coming into the body, becoming really aware of what's happening inside the body, what's happening inside the heart, what's happening inside our sexual centers, by bringing awareness to finer movements of emotion, of feeling, of sensuality, sensitivity, sensation, the answers start to appear, and in fact a healthy pathway starts to appear. So one definition, just to answer your Tantra, is it's a meditation on the body. And another definition is it's the marriage of energy and consciousness. So as we notice our energy, as we become more conscious of that, actually transformation can occur just through that. Just through that.
Sorry, I've gone with that one a minute. Hang on. Yeah, I think that I understand that myself, and I think it takes us and anyone who's watching this beyond what might be imagined. So talking about transformation, talking about healing, talking about a deep seeing into your own self. So where does the sexual marry with the transformation?
So I always like to think about sexuality in context. And I think one of the biggest wounds in the West is seeing it out of context. To quote one of my early students, who I always remember, he said, this is the opposite of a yoni or a vagina on a stick. And this idea of the yoni or the vagina on a stick is like an idea of pornography, an idea of women, an idea of sexuality that is far more pervasive than pornography itself, although that utterly, can perpetuate that image. So it's the opposite of that. And if I can just give you some sense of how I see sexuality. So on a biological level, yes, it's possible to conceive without love. We know that can happen. But it's a whole other level of conception when we create a child and the lovemaking truly is making love. And so that the sexual expression is actually an offering of love, is a real act of devotion. And that utterly meets both people and creates a child from that union. That is my hope, that we would all perhaps conceive, and be conceived from that place. That's kind of, I believe, the blueprint, the possibility of life. And even without that, there's, inherent in all life is the mystery of conception. Where actually life is created. And Tantra helps us feel into, discover, perceive for ourselves some of that raw creative energy. And once we see that, we can't anymore see sexuality as a vagina or a yoni on a stick. That's ridiculous. It's as paper thin as that image implies. And we start to see that, that how we make love is how we parent, how we are in the world, and we start to see, the generational imprints that we've received and how we can transform those and what we can offer to life. And even without doing any particular practice, when we make love in a context that's so much wider and appreciative, has an air of reverence, everything changes. When we look at the yoni as an expression of the ultimate possibility of the feminine, and the lingam, the vajra, the male organ, as an expression of the masculine, we're no longer talking about a quick fuck, even if what happens is a quick fuck. We're no longer talking about release, we're talking about a mystery.
That's so beautiful. I'm curious to know, having worked for so many years with individuals and couples in so many different contexts, Leora, you must have such an insight into the types of issues and problems or difficulties or challenges, however you want to name it, that are very common you must see, it's this one again, or it's this one again. So what are the types of issues or challenges that you see being so pervasive?
Yeah, thank you. Well, actually, I find that a lot of what I'm working with in many areas, in many iterations, around the theme of boundaries. And people often think about that word and they think about it as a no, they think about it as hard. I think about boundaries as actually self-regulation. I think about boundaries as a moving flow of integrity, of the way in which two people, two organisms, three more, or one person and the environment interact. It's that point of interaction. It's the magic that is the relationship between us and another, or us and life. And so many of us are wounded in that area. So many of us habitually might overstep without knowing our truth for something else. So women might have sex with their partner in a time when they don't really want to, when they don't really for themselves want it. But that's the more obvious side of it. It's the more subtle elements where, in fact, where we simply move away from our own self-awareness.
This is really key, though, because it's a key thing. And again,
Yes.
it's something that people might not necessarily associate with sacred sexuality, with Tantra, with relationship. And I think it's really valuable to talk about this. So say, for example, a woman who has sex when she doesn't really want to, what would be the impact of that for her?
Well, a woman or a man who do anything intimate in any moment that doesn't feel true, doesn't feel true. So what's happening is, verbally, they're communicating a yes. Inside, the body says no. And the body in some way closes down, usually in the heart. Because, we can often stimulate our genitals and get excited. But excitement and arousal and aliveness are not the same thing. And aliveness is a really nourishing inner process. So when we overstep, we say yes, the body then says no, and something shuts down. Some of our aliveness constricts. We don't feel so much, we don't love so much, we don't feel so good about ourselves. The world closes a bit. So if that happens chronically, we live in a tighter, smaller environment, and we're likely to live with a sense of dullness. We can't really meet the exuberance or a love of another quite so freely, perhaps. Sexually, it will show in the sexual organs, again through tension. So in lovemaking, when we want to practice lovemaking as a meditation, we want to have the opportunity for the sexual organs to be really soft. And I mean,
a man's thinking,
yes, soft in the sense of, the erection can be full, but there's a quality of receptivity. So that all of these words that are in popular culture about what a male organ is supposed to be don't necessarily apply. So he can be very firm, he can be erect, he can be very penetrative, but to have that sensitivity, he also realizes how sensitive this organ is and how incredible it is to feel the woman in a full way with the whole of his vagina, the whole of his penis, to feel her movements and the exchange that happens between the vagina and the yoni, the penis, the vagina, how they meet. It's that moment of meeting where the magic comes. And so in that, the man in his heart needs to have a quality of softness that he can feel through his vajra, through his lingam, but really where he feels it is in his heart. He feels the magic, he feels the beauty, he feels the love. And that's where it all comes alive.
What's the ultimate potential then for, I'm going to talk just in heterosexual terms right now, although of course all of this will apply to any kind of sexuality or orientation, but say for a man and woman who are heterosexual, what's the potential as they follow this path together? Well, or individually, actually.
Yes, Well, one actual potential is that they can relax more. You know, that they're not driven so much, because sexual energy can be quite a driving force, but it can actually take us outside of ourselves, whereas this approach to sex and lovemaking actually helps us arrive within. So we become stiller, we become calmer, our physiology settle down, we become happier, more content. Lovemaking actually creates love. So it's a creative process. It's less compulsive, it's less need-based, and it's more joy-based. And then that way of being can infuse into the whole of life.
So what changes do you see happen for those people that you work with individually and in your groups? What changes do you notice as they become more aware? And this, you called it embodied meditation, is that right?
Maybe, but kind of it is a meditation on the body. It is a kind of relaxed embodiment. I think a lot of people, they find that they become more creative because the sexual energy and the creative energy are very connected, interwoven, and they just become freer, more self-expressive. In the couples, there's more laughter, there's more joy, there's more sweetness, there's more understanding of the other person's world, there's more of a sense of enjoyment of the other person and delight in the differences. Individuals, they often feel that they've kind of come home to themselves. They have a way of relating that feels very wholesome. There's a sense of tingliness in the body. Sometimes people feel that they can feel, taste, smell in a different way.
I remember that. I remember coming home from one of your first workshops and just feeling everything so intensely. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Again, just summing up, you know, the wisdom that you have. If you could share one thing with the men and the women watching this to inspire them, to support them, because, you know, everyone's in relationship. Most people are, you know, are having sex, or we're all sexual. So your work touches on something that is of so much importance to all of us.
Yeah.
What can you share with your wisdom to really help us? You know, be better, experience more, live more harmoniously, with more health, with more happiness, with more joy. All the words that you've used.
Thank you. Well, I want to bring in a word I haven't brought in so far, which, you know, might seem the antithesis to what the question was that you asked me, but I want to bring in the theme of trauma, because that's something I've been training in recently. And, you know, trauma can be something dreadful, it can be developmental, just things that we might have considered at a certain point normal, but actually have quite a significant effect on our whole bodies, energies and emotions. And you can include in that stress. But there are early experiences that we may have had that will affect our entire relatedness, you know, how we were in our early relationship with our parents. And it's Tantra in no way moves away from that, totally honours that. And, you know, helps us also go beyond the conditioning. But to go beyond, we have to really understand also where we've come from and really appreciate and welcome and honour that. And so, you know, I want to say to anybody who's not living all of the things that they imagine other people might be or that Tantra could be, it's not that it's not there, it's not that you're doing something wrong, it's that often what's just there is that what we're touching into as we start to embrace more fully our sexuality are the hidden traumas in the body. They start to present themselves, and then couples start to argue. But the argument isn't usually about the thing it appears to be about. It's usually about my trauma meeting your trauma. And what I normally find is that behind that there's a lot of love. But what might be experienced is one pain meeting another pain. And so what I want to say to people out there is that, you know, what I want to say to people out there is that we can meet our pain also with reverence. We can meet our pain gently and gradually from a space of love. And that can be incredibly difficult to do one-on-one with a partner. And that's where I truly believe that community, that a support, a guide, a facilitator, are, as a culture, if we can embrace our need, longing, and the incredible beauty of giving and receiving in community and from others, that can help us unpick and heal and create more space and possibility to do that differently, then we've got a wider possibility of really living our true ecstatic potential.
So I really hear what you're saying about dealing with trauma and how that comes up. I know that from my own experience and much more widely. And I can imagine, again, that people watching this will be thinking, what's trauma got to do with sexuality? Trauma, that sounds like something really awful.
Yeah, thank you. Because often our minds go to natural disasters and all kinds of things like that. And although very sadly that is something afflicting many people in this world, I'm thinking much more of a situation where a child is born and is adopted, for example, into a really good family. But actually there's a real trauma that child has missed his or her birth mother. I'm thinking that in, what might otherwise be seen and experienced as a very healthy upbringing, ways where children have been left as babies in their cots for long periods of time, and something of the bond with humanity has been broken. I'm thinking of situations where parents have been divorced and how that's been communicated in the family and the tensions in the family, how that has left a child feeling alone and skeptical of the possibility of true union. And so what happens is these aren't necessarily conscious memories that occur in the brain, particularly if they're very early. They won't be any verbal associations at all, but they'll be felt when we arrive more intimately. So if you have sex with somebody over a prolonged period of time, intimacy will arise. As sex becomes more full-bodied, intimacy will arise, and then what happens is that those pains that we've stored, they might be stored in the heart, they might be held in the solar plexus, which is where we hold our emotions tight, they might be stored in the guts. And as we start to open our body, we start to have these feelings again. And what a facilitator or a teacher or a guide can do is actually contextualize those, help find a way to help those feelings come through and be understood and be welcomed. And underneath that, there's going to be more joy. Underneath that, there's going to be more sexual potential, more intimate potential. And it's inevitable that wherever we hold in our body, that will start to loosen up and be released through tantric practice.
So what I hear you saying really is that ultimately it's not about the sex. It's really about our human condition and our human experience and connecting to our true essence in the heart. Is that what you're saying?
Well, Tantra, has been, and comes back to the original question about Tantra and Neo-Tantra. People think of it as a brand of sex.
Yeah.
They think it's this kind of sex, but that's nothing to do with what Tantra really is. Tantra is about direct realization, which is why I don't see myself as qualified as a Tantra teacher in that sense. That's not who I am. But we always need to orientate to something greater, to find a bigger perspective and a wider and a deeper possibility. We orientate to what's bigger. If we orientate towards the smallness of a problem, we'll perpetuate it. So if we have a relational problem, if we look at really our deeper longing, which is to see the other as the god or the goddess, it's not just a longing to be seen, it's a longing to experience the other in that way. We long to love, we long to feel reverence, we long to feel that sense of mystery, we long to know deeply, we long to expand. And if we can follow that longing and keep following it, then inevitably how we make love will become an expression of that longing rather than an expression of my need against yours, which will inevitably create conflict. When we move with the longing and the devotion, everything becomes delicious, everything becomes fruity, everything becomes worthwhile and meaningful. We can start to open up on all kind of levels.
Yummy. Got tingles now. Thank you. I know that one of the amazing things in the depth of your experience and your background is that you also have a training in psychotherapy and couples counselling. So I'm wondering how valuable that has been for you in holding space as a facilitator.
Thank you. Invaluable, really, to understand how people hold their histories in their bodies, and therefore how different individuals will unfurl in different ways, that we're not all the same. It's not one size fits all, and there's no ideal to aim towards. I'm interested in helping individuals and couples precisely with their particular, intimate context to find their next step. And I just wanted to tell a little very quick story that on my first module of the couples counselling training I did, the facilitator of that training talked about a good enough relationship. And this was so alien to me coming from the tantric perspective. It was so distasteful, actually. The idea of a good enough relationship seemed revolting, actually, to me at the time, because I had this image, this archetype of the god and the goddess, which was quite romanticized. And, I've come to appreciate over time, mostly through my own life, as well as through working with couples and individuals in and out of relationship, the magic that can happen in a good enough relationship, that we don't need to be ecstatic, multi-orgasmic, deeply meditative, highly reverent, to start to really grow the magic in a very ordinary relationship. And I'm interested in being able to meet human beings, human to human, rather than fantasy to fantasy or vision to vision.
I love that. So for couples in that context, what's the next step? What's the first step?
Well, I think, and this is going to sound so obvious and so boring in a way to the mind, but it isn't when it happens in reality. Because probably we've all heard or said this a million times, but when we can start to feel and see with the heart and appreciate who our partner actually is, not who we want them to be, but who they actually are, then we can start to really see their brilliance. And when we start to see their brilliance, something opens up. So when we can truly appreciate who they are and what they bring, and if we start to see their backstory, and as we start to see where they come from, and how they move towards their deeper vision each day, we can see so much. As we start to also see the difference, I want to add one more thing in, between a reactive, defensive response to somebody and a relational opening. Because just because I get really angry with you today, because you've pressed my buttons and upset me, that's not who I am. If I keep doing it, that's how I will become. But if we can learn ways to come back from that reactive patterning and keep coming back into relationship, everyone will grow. If we can start to understand the physiology behind returning to a relational way of being and what that feels like, what it looks like, what it sounds like, then we can transform so much and live so much more joyful lives, simply the utter joy of being related.
Thank you, Leora. I wonder if you have a parting message for our audience that you'd like to share.
I always remember a book that I read many, many years ago that I totally love, called Tantric Quest by Daniel Odier. And in that book, Daniel Odier meets Devi, and Devi is a tantrika. And she asks him, "Why have you come?" And he says, "I've come to learn, I've come to learn from you. And she said, if you hadn't already tasted what this is about, you wouldn't be here in the first place. And I want to say to our, whoever's listening, to our audience, that whatever it is you're looking for when you're watching this video, you've already tasted it. It's already in you. It's already alive. And my work and our work is simply to help you recognize that, grow it, and find the tools to let it blossom and flourish.
That's wonderful sharing. Thank you so much, Leora. You've shared so much amazing wisdom with us. I wish we could speak to you for a lot longer. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Shakti. Namaste.
And thank you so much for watching. Join us again next time on Heart to Heart with me, Shakti Sundari. And to find out more about Leora, you can head to her website, diamondlight.com.